Hello, and welcome to another segment of Fine Arts Features, the program that highlights members of the faculty and staff of the College of Fine Arts here at Wichita State University. Today, we have a conversation with Cheyla Clawson, Assistant Professor of Dance and Associate Director of the School of Performing Arts. Cheyla is a choreographer, interdisciplinary collaborator, dancer, and sociologist, combining these disparate roles to explore, in her words, what it means to be human. Her personal history, which includes being adopted and losing someone to suicide, fuels the essence of her raw and often intimate dance works. She uses movement as a tool to excavate emotions and thoughts to transcend boundaries. These performance collaborations between community and artist are often followed by facilitated dialogue that sparks important conversation about topics such as vulnerability, gender, race, technology, and communication, and how we see our bodies in everyday spaces. Professor Clawson has her BFA in dance and her MA in sociology, both from Wichita State, and she has her MFA in modern dance from the University of Oklahoma. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Professor Cheyla Clawson. Hello, and welcome to another session of Fine Arts Features. Today, we are featuring Cheyla Clawson, Assistant Professor of Dance in the School of Performing Arts. She is also the Associate Director of the school, and she's the Coordinator of Assessment and Research for the School of Performing Arts. And as such, she has duties and responsibilities that sort of, in those areas that sort of transcend just the school itself and go into college responsibilities as well. Cheyla has her BFA in dance from Wichita State University. She has an MA in sociology from Wichita State University and her MFA in modern dance from the University of Oklahoma. Without further ado, Cheyla, welcome.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Oh, we're just getting started.
Mm.
So my first question in the way of introduction, tell people who you are. We've just met at a cocktail party and I want to know all about you. Who is Cheyla Clawson?
Who am I? Wow. So I'll try to give you the short version. As I've gotten older, I've learned that it's okay to be a little bit more personal. I feel like we remember people's stories. So I was born in Fort Riley, Kansas. I was put up for adoption. I was the third child of my parents, my biological parents. When I was born, my mother was 18 and my father was 21. So he was only temporarily in Kansas, and the whole family's really from Detroit, Michigan. And they told no one. They were going to take it to the grave. So therefore, I got adopted by my mother, who still lives in Augusta, Kansas, where I grew up. We have a wonderful relationship, a truly, really beautiful and supportive, loving woman. And so I went to Augusta. I went to Butler County right after that, my first couple years. And I was originally a chemistry major, and then I was a Spanish major. And then I took some dance classes and learned, wow, this can be a career, or I could get a degree in this. And that was exciting. So went to Wichita State, finished there. My first husband was in the military, traveled around a little bit while he was there, and he had a deployment to Afghanistan is when I decided, and I was teaching at Barton County at that point, well, he's going to go away and I'm getting bored not learning more. So let me go back. I really wanted to do psych, but then I found out there was a GRE. So I went with sociology. Wonderful experience. I was the graduate assistant to David Wright, Dr. David Wright, when he was still running that program. Then I ended up teaching. I was teaching for interest or sociology and dance at Wichita State while I was doing that degree, and had an opportunity. A professor came up for the Kansas Dance Festival and saw a work of mine that he liked, and there was a fellowship available at the University of Oklahoma. And I was thinking that I was on this trajectory to do a doctorate in sociology, and everything shifted back to dance. So went to OU. And then my first husband passed away, and that was in 2009. My daughter was 11. That was, as you imagine, was pretty difficult. So I made a decision to move back to Kansas. Not what I originally thought would happen, but my family was here, started teaching in the dance program, and just never stopped. So I've been back here since 2010. So for 11 years back here. That's kind of the nutshell.
My opinion, you suffer from an affliction that I also suffer from, called terminal curiosity.
Curiosity, that's exactly.
Yeah. As I have observed you, as I've watched you from afar and also up close, you are the epitome of what we hope we are hiring when we do hire a faculty member. And that is someone who is never satisfied with the status quo. My view of life, in whether we're talking about culture or politics or just life in general, is a series of confrontations between the immovable object and the irresistible force. And in my humble opinion, you are definitely in the irresistible force. More than one occasion, your arguments I have found to be irresistible for why we are doing something. So, to that end, let me ask you, why Wichita State? Why higher education?
Well, it's interesting because I thought about this before we met. And the word that I kept coming back to, you already have mentioned, was curiosity, for why higher education. Like, to be in an environment where I get to be curious, I get to be with students and colleagues that are curious. That to me helps push the world forward and challenged. Like I really love the opportunity for challenging conversations and growth. So curiosity in higher education, and you kind of hit the nail on that. I just get bored if I'm not learning. And as a selfishly, hopefully not selfishly, when you get to be a professor in a university, I feel like I get to walk into a room of 20 students and I get to learn so much more versus me and what I'm just teaching them. So I love that kind of collaboration and learning from each other. Why Wichita State? Well, I think I told you when I was at University of Oklahoma, and then a life event happened. I don't know if I would have imagined myself necessarily in Wichita. I don't know if I would have imagined myself immediately going into teaching, although I've always, since I was 19, been teaching along the way, regardless of what I was doing.
Yeah.
And I got back to Wichita State. I have to tell you, going back a little bit, my experience as an undergrad. So Dr. Thomas Haygood was the director of the dance program, and he was before Nick was my director, and we were really small, but what a brilliant man. I actually get to use faculty funds to buy one of his books because it's like $300. He has done so much writing and research on higher dance and higher education in his specialty. So I feel really fortunate to have had him for 3 years, my first 3 years when I was at Wichita State. That's the curiosity, and then also a very high expectation of scholarly work and what that meant, and taking seriously that I have something to offer to the field. Was really inspired by him, continues to be inspired by him. And then in my last year was Nick's first year when I was finishing up, and he and Sabrina were coming in, and just this Nick whole different personality of experiment, fail, try different things you never would have imagined, was really comforting. So I think those blends of my experience made me feel like I could have high standards and be around people that really cared about scholarship in the arts, but also that I was around people where I felt free to explore and be curious for my own interests, and that I would be supported. So those things, my experience as the undergrad and then coming back, and I'm sure sociology played into that too.
Okay. Well, the sordid underbelly to Cheyla Clawson is that even though you are full-time on the faculty of dance, you inculcate and permeate almost everything that you do with a sense of sociological aspects of what it is you do. You really do combine the disciplines that you have studied and become a master of, so to speak. Talk a little bit about that. Why do you think that's important?
Why do I think it's important? When I started studying sociology, and interestingly enough, in my undergrad, I never even took Introduction to Sociology. So when I came back, and it was probably, I came back, my first husband was deploying to Afghanistan. And I took the first 3 weeks, I was taking a couple of psychology courses and intro to sociology, just trying to figure out what I was really interested in. And I remember sitting down and having the meeting with David Wright, and he was like, well, he's the one who told me you need a the GRE to get into psych. We can just let you in right now. Got my transcripts, my GPA was good enough. And I'm like, okay. So it was 3 weeks into school. I was in Intro to Sociology with Dr. Cheyla Hill, who I am now working on a grant with. This is like my first Intro to Sociology course. I'm in her class. And then he throws me into statistics, graduate statistics. And I've never had a statistic course 3 weeks in. So that's how it started.
Multiple regression. Isn't that just the most wonderful thing?
Yeah. And it was all at that point quantitative with David.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. For those who don't know, David heads up the what used to be called institutional research. He is in the administration. He heads up the collection and distribution of all of the data that this university has about itself. Is that a good way to put it?
Yes, the statistics magician.
Yeah.
So that, I think he was super impactful for me about understanding macro and understanding all the different ways society worked together and influenced our norms, our paradigms. And then I was really, I guess, then moved to want to speak to that with movement and dance, because that was how I want to say it. I like to write too, but he was a big influence. And just knowing that if I want to create art, I want to do it with human experience in mind and understanding what different things in society, how they affect people's point of views or how they see the world. So it really informs my art, I think, in that way. But at the end of the day, I also know there's power in the collaboration of the two different disciplines. So I'm not just making a dance for people that are going to come to a dance concert. I want to create work that's interesting to any walk of life of person, and then bringing in experts from other fields. That feels right to me. Mm-hmm. Not just to expand it, but to expand on the depth and the breadth and the kind of humanity of the work.
So for those who aren't familiar with your work, give us some examples of that. I mean, I'll just throw one out, the film that you're working on right now. Talk a little bit about that.
Oh, okay. So I'm working on a film that's based on Kansas women, farmers and ranchers in the early 20th century, kind of the practices or the physical things they did on the farm. I own a farm that we're about to build on with my husband, about 80 acres in Douglas, Kansas.
Yeah.
And so I'm always drawn. I think let me start back. My grandmother passed away 2 years ago, and she would tell me stories of growing up in Butler, Kansas, rural Kansas. Mm-hmm. And from hearing her stories growing up, I was always cognizant when I would drive down this highway, which I knew was a road in Augusta that she used to walk to school on, and just think about all the people who had traveled there before, what that history was, what lived in me from her, and that kind of progression over generations. She was my first inspiration, and I really regretted that I didn't take her stories from her. So thinking about her in rural life, that's always been interesting to me. And then being a person who loves to be out in nature and the farm. So I was curious about this generation of women, not the homesteaders, those would have been their mothers, but the first that were really on the land. And when I started doing research, there are hardly any books that have images of women. If they do, they're sitting on the porch very nicely with their hair done. In the late, it's like I focused on 1890s to 1910, but just the sheer amount of work from like 4 a.m. and all the cooking and the domestic work in the home to helping with the fields, especially when there were labor shortages. I'm just curious, and maybe I'm curious because I love history and I love Kansas, and I just want to know the land that I'm always standing on, what was here before me, and how can I find ways to honor that through art.
You remind me of stories of my mother. She grew up in a little cotton farm outside of Dallas, which is probably a strip mall in one of the suburbs now.
Yep.
But she talked about how the women would go out and pick cotton and with the men, and then they'd all come in for lunch, and the men would rest, and the women would have to cook lunch, and then they'd all go back out.
Yes.
That message was not lost on me.
That's interesting. That almost makes me want to segue into something else, but I won't. I'll stay and finish the thought. So taking those ideas and those histories of the women, I thought, well, I would love to do it as a film, and kind of capture an abstraction, but most importantly, I just wanted to put the female body in the Kansas landscape. Mm-hmm. So we would have those images. And ultimately, my hope is that we're getting close. Brett, I'm working with Brett Jones, has been amazing. We've done a second draft. Hopefully we'll finalize the film next week. But the hopes is that there'll be voiceover that has historical context, because I would love for it to be something that can be used educationally in schools in the state.
Great. So go off on the tangent. You almost went off on a tangent. What tangent were you thinking of?
There's so many tangents. I'm like another example of work. You brought up your hearing stories about the women helping the men in the cotton fields. So my biological father is Mexican American, and I'm currently kind of digging into what that is, being adopted and not growing up in that culture.
Yeah.
Going down that road and what that means. So kind of looking at my body and my lived history. When I met them, and I have other adopted friends with a different experience, but when I met them, I am 100% my biological parents, 100%. And even my mother, I was the third daughter. I'm the only child that looks like her. Like they call me the Mexican Gail because she's English Irish.
Oh,
and
wow.
I'm the only one who looks like my mother really at all. And if I had blonde hair and green eyes, we would pretty much look the same. So just that whole meeting them and that process. In January, I spent a day listening to my dad tell me more about his family history, but trying to look at, they would do crop work and rotate based on harvesting crops. So that's what he did when he was younger. So I'm thinking about that heredity in my body. Also, though, being adopted and not growing up with that culture and not really getting into that until I was in my early 20s. So that's kind of it's not the next thing. It's one of the things.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I know that because of your expertise in sociology, you are one of the gurus, shall we say, in the college for assessment and and for strategic planning. How did you go about doing that? I mean, tell me a little bit about why that interests you.
Oh, Rodney, it's hard for nothing. I mean, it's hard for me not to be interested in anything. It's a problem.
Well, yeah, that's true. We've already established that.
But I think you know what? I hadn't thought a lot about that, and I think you're helping me recall something. So I was telling you when I was doing my MA in sociology at Wichita State, I was teaching, and I could never do this now in my 40s, but I was in my early 30s. I was teaching 9 credit hours for sociology, 2 intro courses in culture and ethnicity, and 9 hours for dance. So I was teaching 18 hours a semester for, I think, 2 semesters a year completely. And it was probably during that time, because teaching intro to social, I taught the night class. It was a Monday night, so I'd always have close to 100 people and a lot of non-traditional students. And started for the first time, because I hadn't really done assessment in dance, not in a traditional way, doing an introduction with a large class, like, okay, I got to get some rubrics. I have to get these things in place. I have all these people, and I need better organization. So from the sociology, I think teaching those courses, when I started grad school at University of Oklahoma, my first semester teaching modern dance there, which I had mostly musical theater majors, I thought, why can't I do this for a dance class? So I started implementing a system which I still use now, where I give daily points every class, because my experience as a student in the arts sometimes where I wouldn't know my grade until midterm. And sometimes I felt like it was subjective. So of my interest of why can't I feel like I could be more objective if I gave the feedback and grade or points earned per class. And then I felt like I was more objective over a full semester. And so I also, in the daily records, I give them amount of points. They get so many points for dress code and retaining and bringing the information, but I give them feedback. So in Blackboard, it's easy to give them daily feedback and just type it in. That, I think, was my first interest in feedback is important, even in the arts, not just this conversation, the written work, but the importance of it to really have balance and objectivity, to have the data. So that was the first thing, I think, for me, that was the crossover from sociology to implement into the arts. And then I also started doing the jury data for dance, of taking it. And then for me, I'm like, how's anybody else satisfied that we just know this one thing and we're checking a box? When we started tracking the first group of students over 4 years, then it was clear that there was a drop by their junior year. Well, that's a big problem. And if we weren't looking at the data and look at the numbers, we may have kind of known it, but it really helps support, to me,
anecdotally.
And to start to really say, okay, why is this happening? How do we need to change our curriculum for this not to happen? How do we shift our approach to the content we're giving students over that 4-year learning arc for them to graduate at their highest level? So to me, I get excited about having the information to support what you do. I think that's integrity in the work too, and validity, and consistency. So that just, I guess, me excited.
I'm going to make a statement, and then you're going to tell me why I'm full of it, or validate what I say. I don't know. I'm a recovering opera singer, which means that a lot of my teaching career was in teaching applied voice and, related courses. And like you, I've done a lot of observing of people in other parts of music disciplines and also in other disciplines, because voice is one of those areas where we do collaborate oftentimes with other arts entities like dance, like theater, etc. And I think, as a general rule, I think one of the things that makes someone a good fine arts faculty member, for the most part, is that they are doing a daily or lesson by lesson assessment. If I'm an applied voice teacher, I am constantly assessing what my student is doing. But we don't do it in a way in which we really collectively and objectively collect the data and analyze it beyond that first step. Is that a fair statement, you think?
I think it is more than fair. And from my point of view, I feel like that's something, sometimes that's the art shooting themselves in the foot in an academic institution, whereas it doesn't mean that we have to be like other people or other disciplines. But when we have the data to support what we're doing, I think that makes it where people in other disciplines, it makes it more understandable. It makes it more relatable. And sometimes I felt like artists that I've known and worked with are all like the kind of the attitude of, well, they don't have to understand us. We're going to do our own thing and people should love what we're doing, versus, well, no, we have to reach across disciplines. If we believe and love what we do, we want to share that and want to make an effort to share it. So I think the data and having that information can help really support. I think about funding that it helps support. I think about for myself, like it's like a tenure packet, right? You have to have this record that then shows, okay, then you deserve to be promoted, or wow, this, you have this data, and like the music theater program, like this clear amount of numbers and how that's increased, right? So maybe that helps support hiring of more faculty. But I think my experience has been with a lot of, not just at Wichita State, but artists in general, is wanting just to talk about things, but not taking that next step of the documentation and understanding the power in having that information.
Okay, I'm going to push you in the corner.
Please.
We've got Cheyla the dancer. We have Cheyla the sociologist. We have Cheyla the professor. We have Cheyla the director. We have Cheyla the choreographer. We have Cheyla the grant writer. We have Cheyla the producer. On your best day, which one of those are you, or what are you doing? At the end of the day, you say to yourself, oh, that was one of my favorite days because I got to do this, this, and this.
That's tough.
Don't say all of it because that's too easy and out.
Yeah, I won't say all of it. I feel like I'm at a place in my career, especially academic career, that I'm starting to evaluate which things need to be prioritized, perhaps more than others. Maybe that's in specific settings or during the school year and the summer. But I don't want to be a serial entrepreneur. I'll come back to that forever.
Ooh, that's a very, very provocative term.
It is. I've learned that that's probably who I am. So I would say the perfect day, well, definitely when I can integrate research and teaching and choreography, those kind of laboratory experiences with students or other colleagues, which I wish there was a little bit more of that, of just curiosity and creating in the moment. That's really exciting because that's for me when new things come up. And then maybe the perfect day is then I have a couple of hours to process it. And that's something that I don't feel we do enough of, just probably society overall. It's like I check this and I do this and I do this, versus just giving time or making time then to process what that was. And then to circle back to that same group of people, maybe the next week, or even if it's later that day, and then dig deeper into whatever that kind of creative or conversation was, whether it was creative process or conversation. So that overlaps: researcher, choreographer, teacher, probably dancer, and I think leadership too, right? So whether it's a director or a choreographer, there's still leadership tied into all of that. That may be the perfect day. And then process time is essential. Then I would still have time to go out to the farm and enjoy a sunset. It's crazy. Once you get back out to nature, it feels like I have 12 more hours in my day, just the different spatial environment. Then it would be dinner. Then it would be a game of cribbage, watching something on Netflix. And then it ends with Harris and I in bed doing the New York Times crossword. That's a daily thing. So that's my perfect day. I don't know if that integrated everything, but hopefully some of those things.
Okay, here's a provocative question. What do you like to watch on Netflix?
We just went if I were not a dance teacher, I would be a forensic scientist. I'm obsessed. Well, I still want to learn that. I figured maybe if I have a couple more years, there's so many things I still want to learn. But
well, actually, one of my questions to you is there something that if you could learn anything that you don't know, what would it be? So would that be it?
There are lots of things. My first thing would be Spanish. Like I know some of it, but that would be the thing I'd want to become. I feel like I had a time in my life I was more proficient. So that would be it. But forensic science, Netflix, I like anything that's like documentary. Like I only read nonfiction books. I know I'm pretty boring like that. But like if I'm going to watch some Criminal Minds, I've been through that whole series. NCIS, been through that whole series. But I love like the little, what do they call them? Like I just watched The Keepers, about the priest that had abused. It was in at a Catholic high school. God, it was in Baltimore. So kind of those mini documentaries that have some historical context, sometimes religion, sometimes sociocultural issues, but I like it kind of compact so I don't feel like I have to keep watching and go back to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. Good. You are, as you just exemplified, you are someone who has this compelling need to find associations and combinations and collaborations for the things that you are passionate about, that interest you, and so forth. Right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
So I have a question for you. I mean, we did, after all, hire you as a dance professor. So
yes.
we're gonna focus on dance.
Okay.
Do you see sociology and assessment and creativity and so forth are things that you utilize to bring into your dance? Or do you see dance as a form to tell the story of and elaborate on those very things? Does that question even make sense to you?
It does make sense. It's a good challenging one, Rodney. As far as like sociology and dance, I really feel like they can inform each other depending on the context. I think having a social context within the dances I create, I hope make them more relatable.
Yeah.
It makes me think of how I'm relating to an audience versus if I'm doing a traditional concert piece, or I prefer kind of immersive with people mixed in a more everyday setting.
Yeah.
It makes me more aware, but I kind of love that you asked that, because I also think the arts bring something to social theory and just kind of that guide, like qualitative, quantitative research.
Yeah.
Bringing light to it in a different way of understanding it. I don't know if you read much Brene Brown. I'm a huge fan. I went through some training and counseling on her work with my daughter when she was in high school. But she's a qualitative researcher who studies, I love about empathy, but it's about shame and guilt. And in her research, she talks, regardless of what the topic is, even though that's kind of her life work, about shame and guilt and empathy and how we progress through those things, is that the qualitative or the storytelling, and that's how I use or view the art part,
sure,
bring the humanity to the research, right? The research and numbers by themselves mean nothing, but art brings the stories and the humanities to an understandable place that really is necessary for us to have conversations and even look at data, in my opinion, I suppose. So I think it's a two-way street, perhaps, but I do love that the arts make things more visceral, more real, more relatable than just numbers on a page. As far as assessment, go ahead.
I remember a quote about mankind, or the human species, is the only species on Earth that has the capability of asking questions, and that the arts are the qualitative way that we answer the question, why? So these questions are a little bit loaded in that I'm going in a specific direction.
Okay.
I know that you feel passionately about the things that we've been talking about to the point where you have developed a sequence concentration. Um, so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I have to come back to, well, you know this. So I left Oklahoma when my first husband passed away, and I still
Yeah.
had like 6 credits to finish my MFA. My daughter was having a lot of mental health challenges. So we moved to family. And so that kind of just kind of got put off and put off and put off because of life circumstance. And when I went back and finished a couple of years ago, I had my a guidance from Dr. Jody Herzog in sociology, and she's the chair of
Here,
sociology
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, at Wichita State. So I had permission to have an outside member on my committee, and I feel like most all of my work was done with her more than the 2 professors at University of Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And she and I had talked even before this of ways to integrate a possible kind of social theory in the arts course that I was going to create. And it was the first time where I'm like, these are both the things I love and they can exist together in the world, and got really excited of the potential impact of social theory, perhaps social justice, and the arts as ways of coming together to help make that a more human connection to a community. So we talked about that. I worked with her through the research. And then the next year, I remember I was at NASD meeting, the accrediting body for dance with Nick. I was in a
Sure.
new director's training and kind of listening to things. And then my mind started going even further. So this is before I finished the degree, actually. I was like, wow. And all this, I'm supposed to be listening to leadership things. And I was listening, but my brain was going about, how do I put these things together? So that night in my hotel room, I looked at the Wichita State course catalog online and just started pulling courses and pulling descriptions and how could these things fit together. Sent it to Jody the next morning via email. She's like, okay, yeah, I think we could do something with this. Then we got excited, brought in Dr. Hill, Cheyla, and then Jody Simon, who also taught for women's studies and now has the immense task because she teaches men and masculinities that, why is not coming to me? Dr. Matson.
Yeah, Ron Matson.
Dr. Matson, yeah, that Dr. Matson used to teach. So
one of my old colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yes, he was the director of the sociology program when I was in it.
Yeah.
Or the chair. So kind of brainstorming, and then the president's competition, the first time interdisciplinary competition was coming up, and we're like, well, let's write a degree. Why not? And so we looked at, again, kind of what already existed at Wichita State. And there were all these wonderful courses being taught in different disciplines in different schools, but not very much kind of collaborative overlap. And so when we decided, okay, we made a proposal for a BA in Performing Arts and Society. We were finalists, which was great. We didn't win. I'm still bitter about not getting a parking spot for free, but we got to present as finalists. And really it would have been me developing one course. It would have only required an additional new course for the arts and society. And then as academic life goes, it happened. A couple years went by. We knew it was there. Actually, I talked to Twyla saying, okay, this summer, let's come back and look at it again this summer. Maybe it can be a certificate, or we have to be able to do something with this. And then in the fall, when we had the convocation in 2019 and the challenge for the university from Mark McCormick, had me thinking about it again. And I know Linda Starkey, the director of School of Performing Arts, and yourself, we've had conversations about what could this possibly mean? Could we use this? And the thing when I went back and looked at the degree is we had the gen ed, but we had a social justice foundation. Like we'd already built that into the degree. And it really allowed, how we wrote it is in the School of Performing Arts, although I thought the whole time it could be applicable to the all CFA, was that students could choose if they wanted to do dance and music and social justice, right? So it's kind of the honors college. They can do kind of multiple tracks in a similar format. So it really gives students flexibility with the idea either to do one thing in social justice or combine a love of multiple art forms plus social justice, or go a little bit more toward political science. So that happened prior to this summer. And I think just the heightened sense of injustice and racism in America. And the whole school faculty in the School of Performing Arts, I would never take credit for this, came together and said, what are we going to do? Like, we don't want to just put words out there. What is actionable? So we decided to create an Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity Alliance, IDEA or IDEA. Put that together. I'm chairing that with alumni from each program area of theater, music, theater, of dance, current students, myself chairing it, and then Assistant Professor Sarah Broussard, who's a costuming professor. So we're looking at student experience and culture. We're in the middle of curriculum and then programming. So just their experiences. And the faculty's having training from an outside scholar. So it's just kind of this momentum was building. We know it's important work. And so the alliance, and then we had faculty training, and this particular scholar, Charles Anderson,
University
dance
of
and
Utah.
theater,
Yeah.
University of Texas, Austin.
Oh, University of Texas, Austin.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Yes, but University of Utah, he's been over a year and a half working with them on diversity and inclusion. So that's probably maybe the link. But building toward that, he's going to have a workshop in April with our School of Performing Arts students around social justice and the arts, and then hopefully a fall residency, and kind of just building kind of a pilot for us to see how all those things fit together, and then go back and in a modified fashion submit a potential emphasis in social justice in the School of Performing Arts. But kind of using the pilot and working with Charles, and in the fall here to create a piece on social justice with students. Well, then hopefully that's what we would be doing moving forward.
So I am the parent of an 18-year-old who wants to come to Wichita State to major in dance. Why the heck is all this hooey about social justice relevant at all to my daughter learning how to dance? I mean, she's got so many things that she has to do already in order to get out of there in 4 years. Yeah. To be a competent dancer. Why the heck are you throwing this on her? How's that for a question?
Why the heck? Wow, there's so many things. I have 2 students actually right now that came in and that were interested in sociology and dance. So I think often students come in with more than one interest. But my first thing is, well, they would do a BA, which also is social justice, versus the BFA, which is to me more conservatory-like training with a lot heavier technique.
Yeah.
I would say it's an expanded curriculum. It is an opportunity, even if they go the BFA track and didn't want to do a full extra emphasis in social justice with the BA, it's really an opportunity to see the impact of what they do, to make what they do in a dance studio every day relatable to humanity, contextual, so that it's not this isolated thing that they think they're just going to do this one thing. Because even if they're a performer and so I had this experience, a short side note, I have a duet, No Such Symbiosis, that got to perform at the Kennedy Center with ACDA. And when I set it on students at Wichita State, they were the 3rd couple to do it, of a man and a woman. It was about affairs and infidelity, which is a pretty mature subject matter. Mm-hmm. And we went into
not as provocative as, say, doing the crossword puzzle in bed with your husband.
Right, exactly. But I was asking them to interpret these human experiences that they had never connected with, right? They had never had those experiences yet as very young dancers, of being in a 10-year marriage and then having that trust broken, or just layers upon layers of pretty, I think, challenging emotions. But we related them to, well, you feel love, you feel fear, you feel jealousy. But we also then talked and did research about studies in infidelity, studies in trust and relationships. So to me, them having a social context added to who their characters were and how they could be in that role, but also be authentic with who they were as emotionally, trying to connect to those ideas and those themes in the work. So even if it wasn't total social justice, I think understanding humanity and emotions and how we connect on a social level, or psych. I think psych is just as fascinating. Psychology adds to, even if they were a person who just wanted to perform, because they have to be more than the steps.
You used a very significant word there, trust. Maybe not in all art forms, maybe the visual arts where you can create your art by yourself, but certainly in the performing arts, as a dancer or as a musician, a singer or a violinist in an orchestra, or an actor in a production or whatever. Trust is a very, very, very bedrock basic element. When you go out on a stage, you trust that the people that you interact with will know their lines, or will know or that you're going to leap into the arms of someone, and you trust that they're going to catch you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a very visceral connection to what you were referring to about the trust that is there in a marriage and in a relationship.
Yeah. How do we get on that, Rodney? But yes,
I don't know. We're going. I feel like Peter Rabbit. We've gone down through so many rabbit holes, but that's great. This is really. What was the last thing that you did that gave you childlike joy?
This is challenging for me, Rodney, because I live in a world of structure.
Yeah.
And I like, maybe I've even sometimes color coded a vacation list. But
oh, you're one of those, huh?
It's not as bad anymore.
Yeah.
Not as much as I used to be. But for me, within the structure, that creates freedom. So when I do go into a rehearsal space, even if I have 10 other things the same day, I know that this is what it is. I can put myself into it and I can be present in that moment. But it's not always that easy. Sometimes it's challenging. So I feel like it sometimes can be difficult for me to find a childlike joy. And I'm like, God, when is the last time like childlike joy? When do I let go of, maybe it's control in some ways, like within, right? Strengths and weaknesses are in context. I'm a believer of that too. But I think I go back to a moment, probably, I think it was the summer of 2012. And I went to a somatics workshop at the University of Utah for a week in June, and kind of working through approaches to a somatic practice, Bartenief, and being in the floor. And we were having kind of this guided meditation about play and being a child. And I ended up on the floor, and my memory took me to swinging on swings at recess in grade school. And I think you're asking me joy, but I think sometimes joy and grief can go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And within those moments, I felt it, and I felt so open, but I just found myself in tears. Not for regret per se, but because I don't think I had felt something, just a pure joy and freedom and no judgment or whatever in that moment. So God, that's 2012. I should do some work in that area.
Well, you mentioned the word grief. So what would you like at the end of your life, many, 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 many years from now, of course, what would you like your obituary to say?
Boy, this is hard. And I've had to do this for some artist things, like write your obituary. I don't know if I've lived enough life to totally know, but I think I go back to the consistent curiosity, like that always a willingness and openness to want to know more, perhaps other perspectives, other, being in hard conversations with other people to create change and progress. I would also say a constant quest for knowledge, that kind of goes with the curiosity. But maybe above else, I hope I'm still striving for this, to be a really strong facilitator, to be the person that helps other people achieve the things that they love to do, help them figure out maybe first what it is that they love, and then to help them on that path to get toward that being something they get to experience every day of their life.
I know one of the things that your obituary will say, that as a professor, as a teacher, as a mentor and trainer of your students, you exposed them to a process that allowed them to discover that being a dancer wasn't a very didn't have to be just a linear, structured process of learning the technique of moving your body, that there was so many more elements to it. The why we move our body in such a way.
Thank you for that. The why. Yes, Rodney, the why.
We always come back to the
to
why.
the why. So
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
That gives me something to continue to think about and strive for. So I also feel like that's a little bit of a good challenge for me.
Yeah. This has been a wonderful time. And I know it's been wonderful because practically every topic that we've touched on, I feel like we've only touched on, and there's so much more. We could sit here for another 3 hours, but I just want to thank you so much for taking this amount of time out of your busy, busy schedule. What most people don't know is that we had to hire you full time just to give you a respite so that you wouldn't have to work so hard.
Right.
You have been a true joy to be a colleague with, and an observer of. And I know that your students and your colleagues have nothing but the utmost respect and joy is that they derive from working with you and for you. So with that, Cheyla, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much. You too. Have a great day.
All righty.
Bye-bye.